Hi, my name's Bodhi Paksha, and mostly what I do is I teach meditation. That's the real passion in my life, and the reason I love doing that is because I see people getting happier. And one of the things that I've been teaching for the last few years, which has been probably the most revolutionary thing that I've stumbled across and put into practice in my own life, is the practice of self-compassion. Or as the title of this talk is, How to Stop Beating Yourself Up. And a lot of us beat ourselves up a lot of the time. We're very prone to self-criticism. When we make a mistake, we pounce on it. We might obsess about it and be, really anxious about it for quite a long time afterward. Sometimes we can be so perfectionist. This is another aspect of being hard on ourselves and being self-critical. We can be so perfectionist that we don't even want to start jobs because we might mess up. We can set ourselves unrealistic goals, like I'm going to get up every morning and I'm going to go running for 45 minutes, and then what happens is after a couple of days you have a day when you just don't feel like doing it, and then you feel really crap and you beat yourself up, and every time you see your running shoes you feel really terrible, and what happens is we just end up not doing stuff because we criticize ourselves so much for not doing it perfectly. And the ironic thing is that we carry around this idea that we need this self-criticism in order to do stuff. Yeah, we think that if we don't constantly beat ourselves up, then we're actually not going to perform. But it doesn't really work very well. I mean, it can work in the short term. You do see people who are very self-critical, who achieve a lot. I have been one of those people in the past. But in the long term, what happens is that we burn out. This constant, relentless criticism and anxiety about whether we're going to do things perfectly leads to a great deal of stress and sometimes to depression as well. And it has physical effects too. There was just the other week, there was a study came out from Brandeis University where some researchers discovered that there was a connection between self-compassion and low levels of inflammation. So even on a kind of a cellular level, this sense of stress that we impose upon ourselves leads to the body being inflamed, and that has very significant effects because inflammation in the body is associated with heart disease and cancer and a whole bunch of other illnesses. So we're doing ourselves a huge favor if we learn to be self-compassionate, if we learn how not to beat ourselves up. It's something that helps us to be more effective, it's something that helps us to be happier, and it's something that helps us to be healthier as well. So what's not to like about self-compassion? Well, actually, that brings us to big idea number one about self-compassion, which is that self-compassion is not self-indulgent, because this is one of the fears that people have about self-compassion. And when I was thinking about this particular topic, I cast my mind back to the very first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. I don't know if you remember seeing Deanna Troi in that. She's very empathic. Yeah, she's an empath. And one of the scenes that just made me completely crack up was they're investigating, I think it's some kind of new planet, and she has an encounter with some alien mind, and she's going, "Oh, the pain, the pain," and it's kind of hilarious. I mean, she's reduced to, she's completely incapacitated by this pain. I actually had to laugh when I saw it. But that is not self-compassion. That is being dragged down by our suffering, which is the opposite of self-compassion. It's pretty much self-pity. This is what happens when we get into self-pity. We're obsessed with our own pain, and it's like, oh God, life is so terrible, and my life is awful, and that is not self-compassion. Self-compassion is also not just about toughing it out and ignoring our suffering, because that doesn't particularly work. That's what leads to stress. Self-pity tends to lead to depression, and trying to tough it out leads to stress, because okay, you can try to just override the fact that you're having a hard time and that your body is screaming, I've had enough, I want a break, but merely kind of forging ahead doesn't stop the fact that your body is sending out the signals. You can't take it anymore. Your mind has had enough. Your body has had enough. So we end up burning out in the long term. And another form of self-indulgence is lashing out. We kind of pay it forward. So the CEO gives his underlings a hard time, and those underlings give their underlings a hard time, and so on until the office boy kicks the cat, and then the cat wrecks the ficus tree. So self-compassion doesn't do any of these things. When we're self-compassionate, we acknowledge our suffering, and I'll say a bit more about suffering later on and what that is. We acknowledge our suffering in an emotionally healthy way. So we acknowledge that is going on. But part of us is standing back from our difficult experiences, our experiences of discomfort or pain or suffering. Part of us is standing back and isn't caught up in those experiences. And we're able to offer ourselves support and encouragement and reassurance to the part of us that is struggling. And this leads to big idea number 2, which is that self-compassion makes us stronger. It doesn't make us weaker. So what is compassion, first of all? I should address that. So compassion is an attitude of care and kindness in the face of suffering. And compassion is not weak. You think of the movie Schindler's List. It's a true story about Oskar Schindler, a very compassionate man. He stood up to the Nazis, for goodness sake. That's weak. Or think of Hotel Rwanda, the character played by Don Cheadle, Paul Rusesabagina. He saved over 1,200 people from slaughter during the genocide in Rwanda. That is not weak. That is strong. That is being powerful. So, people worry that compassion is going to make them weak, that if they're compassionate, people are going to walk all over them, but that doesn't follow at all. Being compassionate doesn't mean, being stupid. And what is self-compassion? Self-compassion is treating your own pain in a similar way to if you met a friend who was having a hard time. You offer sympathy, support, encouragement, etc. to yourself. And self-compassion isn't weak either. Self-compassionate people tend to be very highly emotionally resilient. That is, they bounce back from difficulties. Emotionally resilient people tend to have a great deal of emotional awareness, plus a whole toolkit of ways to deal with difficult situations. And so you find that people who have self-compassion have lower rates of stress and depression, and they're less at risk of burnout. And talking about self-compassion being weak or not being weak, it makes us stronger. It actually takes courage to face our emotional pain, to recognize that actually we're having a hard time. So rather than trying to run away from our pain or trying to deny it, we actually face up to that. That's a courageous act. I've got a friend who's a really brilliant writer. I had a conversation with her just the other weekend. She's a wonderful writer, but she hasn't written in 2 years. And a lot of us have this experience of being blocked, that you want to produce something, but you look at the blank page and you're terrified of making a mess, and so you don't begin. So we need to be able to learn to deal with our fears. That is a self-compassionate thing to do, is to face your fear and to deal with it. It's not at all weak. And big idea number 3 is that we don't need to be hard on ourselves in order to be motivated. So it's a big mistake to think that if we stop beating ourselves up, we're going to lose our motivation, or we're going to start doing our work or doing whatever it is that we want to do in a substandard kind of a way. In fact, this fear of messing up that we have when we're relentlessly self-critical blocks our creativity. Right? So, we're all familiar with brainstorm exercises, and what's the cardinal rule of brainstorm activities? You don't criticize. Imagine, just for a moment, thought experiment, you're in a brainstorm session and people are being really self-critical. So, the first person comes up with an idea, and someone else chips in and says, "That's a crap idea. What a terrible idea. What an idiot you are." What's going to happen to the creativity in that brainstorm session? It's not going to happen. But we treat ourselves like this all the time. So my friend sits in front of the computer and she thinks about something to write, and immediately part of her steps in and saying, "That's not good enough. You idiot. That's going to be terrible. People are going to hate that idea." And so she doesn't give herself permission to create. Most highly creative people actually have a very high tolerance of imperfection, because there's a sense of playfulness, there's a sense of experimentation involved in creativity. There's a famous story of Edison. Someone goes to him, and apparently the story wasn't actually about the light bulb at all, but about a battery. And he's been working for 5 months on trying to perfect this battery. And someone says, "Well, so you've been working for 5 months and you haven't learned anything?" And he said, "Well, no, we've learned thousands of ways that this doesn't work." So that takes a huge amount of resilience to be able to continue. I mean, think how many times each of us has started some new task and we think, "Yeah, well, I'll take this up." I remember when I was a kid, I decided I was going to take up painting. I did my first painting. I looked at it. It was really crappy, and that was it. I didn't do any more painting. You can't create if you don't give yourself permission to mess up. Imagine if Edison had been self-critical in the way that most of us are. He wouldn't have invented anything very much. So we need to accept imperfection. We need to accept the fact that we mess up. We don't do things perfectly. We're all works in process. We need to learn to deal with the frustration of when we want to be able to do something, but we haven't figured out how to do it yet. All of this is not just compatible with a desire to achieve, but it's actually essential if we want to achieve. And this takes us on to big idea number 4, which is that self-compassion starts with accepting that it's okay to suffer. Okay, so if you're going to practice compassion, you've got to accept you're going to suffer, and that's okay. And we tend to have funny views about self-compassion. About suffering. Often our views of suffering are kind of materialistic. So we think of, when you think of suffering, what do you think of? You probably think of, starving people in the world. You think of people who are homeless. You think of someone who's broken a leg or has got cancer or something like that. These kind of big experiences of suffering. But actually, we all experience suffering in different ways throughout the day, every single day. Not necessarily, great physical pain or mental anguish, but just things like, you're giving a presentation and there's, a degree of fear there, or you're just concerned about what people think about you. You're in a meeting and you want to say something, and it's like, are people going to shoot this idea down? Are they going to think I'm an idiot for suggesting this? That kind of thing. Anxieties about interviews, having your feelings hurt. Maybe you've done something great and you don't get the appreciation that you think you should have got, and you kind of feel hurt. Being disappointed, being frustrated because you're trying to do something and it doesn't go as quickly or as well as you want. So, I mean, all of these things, they're woven throughout our day. We're all having these little micro experiences of suffering and difficulty throughout the day. These are a normal part of life. They're not a sign of failure. And I think this is one of the things that highly self-critical people get into, is thinking, well, if I'm having a hard time, then I've failed. And that's not the case. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be anxious. So, but these experiences often become a kind of a springboard for self-critical thinking. So, maybe you feel a bit kind of lonely or isolated, and you kick off a story based on that experience of loneliness or isolation, and you start telling yourself, well, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not wanted. People don't want me. People don't want to be around me, and we intensify our suffering. we feel embarrassed about something, and we start, telling ourselves, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I shouldn't have said that." Um, so it's okay to have these initial experiences of things like loneliness or anxiety or embarrassment. If we can accept them and not beat ourselves up for them, we'll actually be much happier. So self-compassion involves acceptance. It involves a high degree of acceptance, acceptance of difficult feelings, acceptance of making mistakes. It's okay to experience these things. And sometimes when I've experienced something like embarrassment, like a little while ago, I remember I asked somebody out and I got shot down in flames, and there was a self-critical part of me that just stepped in and was saying, "Oh God, you shouldn't have asked. That was completely inappropriate," etc. And I caught myself, and I was just feeling this, all this turmoil inside, and I just found myself just saying, "It's okay, it's okay to feel this. It's all right." There's that initial embarrassment, and then you create the whole story around about it. So this brings us on to big idea number 5, which is that most of our suffering is actually self-inflicted. So when I got shot down in flames by that girl, there was the initial kind of embarrassment or hurt, but then what I was doing to myself afterward by beating myself up about it was actually infinitely more painful. So there's this paradoxical idea that we actually have to accept suffering in order to suffer less, right? It sounds kind of weird, but we have to accept suffering in order to suffer less. And there's a great illustration from some of the early Buddhist texts, which I think helps me get my point across here. And it's the teaching of the 2 arrows, right? So we have these initial experiences of, say, anxiety or hurt or embarrassment, and that's like being shot by an arrow. Yeah, it's painful. No one likes that, but it's inevitable. It's just going to happen. These things are going to happen in life. So those secondary thoughts are the second arrow. The Buddha said it's like you've been shot with one arrow and that hurts, and your response to that is to take another arrow and stick it in the same place. And he didn't say this, but it's like you kind of wiggle the second arrow around a bit as well. So a response to this initial suffering ends up causing us yet more suffering. And this is where stress and depression come from. We have an initial experience which is unpleasant, and we pile on more internally generated suffering until we get ourselves into a real mess. And this applies for even physical pain as well. The kinds of suffering that I've been talking about have been more emotional, but even when we have physical pain or we're ill or something like that, we tell ourselves these stories. We end up with the classic man flu. You're lying in bed going, "Oh, this is really terrible," and we end up making ourselves feel far worse. And I found that if I got physical pain and I can learn to relax into it and accept it, it's a completely different experience from when I'm tensing up round about it and wishing it wasn't happening to me and thinking there's something wrong because it is happening. And this brings me on to big idea number 6, which is that emotional pain is physical pain. Yeah, and that might seem counterintuitive because we think of, where do we think of emotions happening? I mean, we probably think they happen in the brain. Yeah, and well, they do to a large extent happen in the brain, but they also happen in the body as well. And when we're experiencing painful states like disappointment or anxiety or hurt, it's painful. That's why we call hurt, right? Because it's actually painful. And what's happening when we're experiencing pain is that signals are being sent down from the brain into the body and triggering pain receptors. Yeah, there are no pain receptors in the brain. You can't feel pain in your brain. What happens, as I said, is that these signals are sent down to pain receptors in the body. It's a mechanism that we've evolved, which is there's something going on and you need to pay attention to it. So if there's a sense of pain in your body, in your heart or in your gut usually, you pay attention to it. So when you're hurt because someone has snubbed you, for example, in evolutionary terms, you really want to pay attention to that, because for our ancestors, being isolated meant being dead. Yeah, you needed other people. Um, and here's a really interesting thing. They've done studies where people have been manipulated experimentally into feeling isolated. So maybe they're playing a game with other people and they don't realize that the other people in the game are actors or don't even exist because it's a computer game, and the other people are kind of ignoring them. And that's a painful situation, isn't it? You know, you're with other people and they're kind of, you know, with two other people and they're relating more to each other than with you, and they don't listen to what you're saying. And it's a painful situation. But it's less painful, this is the weird thing, it's less painful if people have been given Tylenol beforehand. Yeah. Tylenol's a painkiller, right? It deadens our, kind of, you know, numbs our pain response. And we actually feel less emotional pain if we've had Tylenol, which just goes to show that emotional pain is physical pain. And part of self-compassion is learning to notice those manifestations of pain in the body. Very often, as I said, they're around about the heart or they're in the gut. So we notice those physical manifestations of pain and we become mindful of them and we treat them with kindness. And that brings me on to big idea number 7, which is that self-compassion brings together mindfulness and kindness. These are the two big things that we need to bring together. So first of all, you know, what's mindfulness? It's a real buzzword at the moment. You come across it everywhere. There's newspaper articles about it all the time. There's hundreds, thousands of papers published every year investigating mindfulness and its effects on various, you know, illnesses and its effects on the brain, etc. There's things like mindfulness-based stress reduction, which started back in the 1970s and started off the whole mindfulness craze. There's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression. There's mindful programs for overeating, for quitting smoking, for quitting drugs, etc. So it's a real buzzword just now, but it's a very ancient concept. It's a concept of, or it's a practice of observing our experience almost as if we were watching an external event. So kind of standing back from our experience and being aware that we're having this particular experience. So rather than just being in pain and being caught up in that in a Deanna Troi kind of way, you know, the pain, we're actually standing back and we're saying, hey, oh, I'm in pain. This hurts. You know, there's a you kind of up here and there's a pain down there, and you're observing the pain as an object of attention. That's what mindfulness is. And it's mindfulness is a key component of self-compassion. You cannot have self-compassion without mindfulness. Mindfulness gives us an opportunity to pause, because when you're just completely caught up in your pain, you can't choose how you're going to respond to it. So mindfulness gives us an opportunity to stand back, and it creates a kind of a gap between the stimulus of pain, the awareness of pain, and our ability to respond to it. So rather than responding, you know, automatically and habitually, that is the second arrow, saying to ourselves things like, this is terrible, this shouldn't be happening to me, we can choose more appropriate responses. And the most appropriate response to the awareness of pain is kindness. So kindness offers us reassurance. It offers us the reassurance that pain is a normal part of life, that it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us, it's just something that happens, so we're not blaming ourselves. And and it's this combination of mindfulness and kindness that leads to emotional resilience. So, big idea number 8. Mindfulness allows us to notice and accept our suffering instead of reacting to it in ways that cause more suffering. So it allows us to notice and accept the first arrow without taking a second arrow and, you know, plunging it in. And, well, one of the best ways that you can cultivate mindfulness is through meditation. I teach meditation a lot, and the principles of it are really simple. I mean, the simplest form of mindfulness practice is paying attention to your breathing. Yeah, so you do that. You close your eyes. You become aware of the physical sensations of your breathing. You notice the chest, you know, rising and falling, etc. And then you're thinking about that meeting that you've got tomorrow, and the shopping you've got to do afterwards, and then you're planning your day, and you've got to drop the car off at the garage to get it fixed, etc. Your mind is all over the place. And if you start noticing the patterns of what your mind is doing when it's off wandering and not with your actual present moment experience, it's doing things like it's worrying. It's worrying about, will I have time to do all of this kind of stuff? It's rehashing old arguments. It's wishing that you had something that you don't have. You might be doubting yourself, telling yourself these stories about how you're not good at things, you shouldn't do this, etc. So basically, the mind, left to its own devices, goes off wandering and creates suffering. That creates the second arrow. So mindfulness trains us to be more aware of that process. It helps us to stay more with our present moment experience, to notice when the mind is going off and creating suffering, and to just let go of those thoughts, come back again. Yeah. So this is what we do in meditation: breathing, getting distracted, noticing you've been distracted, coming back to your breathing again. And mindfulness, as I've indicated earlier, also helps us to be more aware of what's happening emotionally. It helps us to notice when suffering is present, and it helps us to notice when the mind goes off to do those second arrow activities, and we let go of them and we just come back to the experience of suffering again. So for example, when you're experiencing hurt, you can notice there's hurt present. You can notice where it is in the body. You can notice the size of it, the shape of it, the texture of it. You can notice how it's changing, and meet that with curiosity and acceptance. So kindness, this is big idea number 9. Kindness allows us to treat our suffering with tenderness. So just imagine for a moment that a friend is feeling hurt. Maybe a romantic relationship has ended badly, and you say to them, "Oh God, you idiot! Why did you do that? Why did you make yourself vulnerable in that way? You shouldn't have done that. No one's ever going to love you." That would be ridiculous, yeah? But we do that to ourselves all the time. That's the kind of thing that we do. We do this when we're frustrated, when we're hurt, when we're anxious, yeah? And one thing that's really important to recognize is that, yes, this is going on. We've got these strong emotional responses, but there are other parts of our brain. Our brain's quite modular. There are some parts which are very emotional. There are other parts that are more cool and more thoughtful. And those parts of the brain, those more rational parts of the brain, are capable of giving reassurance to those parts that are more emotional. So we can treat our pain with more kindness, which is like reassuring your jilted friend. And this might sound really cheesy, right? But if you're in pain, I said that sometimes you can talk to your pain, talk to the part of yourself that's hurting. So you can say things like, okay, I know this is painful, but I love you and I'm here for you. Yeah. Okay. So you're in pain, I know, but I want you to be happy. Yeah. So there's various things like that we can do where we offer ourselves reassurance. And actually, I was just demonstrating one of those. Big idea number 10 is that physical contact is an important way of showing self-compassion. It's just placing a hand on the part of the body that's in pain, which is usually, as I've mentioned, your heart or your solar plexus. And perhaps giving reassuring messages or just a little pat or something like that. That has an effect on a physical level. It helps with the release of hormones like oxytocin that help us to feel happier and have less suffering. And smiling as well is another thing. You're in pain, but smile. I don't mean grin and bear it, but smiling is an expression of confidence. So it's a physical expression of the message. Okay, we got this. We can handle this. It's going to be okay. So just to wrap up, some of the basic steps of self-compassion are, first of all, noticing that you're in pain, because sometimes we don't notice that. We're so busy caught up in our reactions to pain to actually notice that we're in pain. So we notice it. We notice where it is in the body. We accept it. We accept our discomfort and allow it to be there without seeing it as us having failed in any way. And we send the heart part of ourselves reassurance and comfort. And Sometimes people think that self-compassion is selfish. Well, it's got the word self in there, right? So it's kind of set up for that. But actually, if you want to be compassionate to other people, it's a really good idea to deal with your own pain first of all, because there's nothing in a way more selfish than being totally focused on the fact that you're in pain and caught up with that. So self-compassion opens up the way for us to be more compassionate with other people. If we empathize with ourselves, then it's easier to empathize with other people. So that's a quick introduction to some of the basic principles of self-compassion. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the future, because just as there's been an explosive growth of investigations into the power of mindfulness to transform our lives, there's the beginnings at the moment of this investigation of the power of self-compassion as well. So I hope that you'll keep tabs on that growth and practice self-compassion. Thank you.